Hello, everyone, and welcome to this Climate Week New York City session sponsored by Holcim, Accelerating Green Buildings for Resilient Cities. This is an incredibly important topic. Delighted to have a wonderful group of people here to discuss. My name is Bullard. I work for Bloomberg. I will be our facilitator and spirit guide for the next hour and a half. We are going to have quite a great deal of fruitful discussion amongst ourselves, but also I should begin to remind at the beginning that we will have discussion from you. So please, for those of you registered, there's an ability to ask questions through a Q&A channel. Please send them our way and we'll be sure to work them into the discussion as we get there. So this topic I find extraordinarily important for many different reasons, which I'll do a tiny effort to encapsulate right here. The first is that the built environment is where we live, work, where we experience lives, where we interact with each other. And it is so much a part of what our present day is and what our future is going to be. And there are many paths that we can take into the future as we continue to urbanize, as we build new things, as we rebuild old things. And increasingly, as we sort of incorporate a great deal of information about what's possible, what we can do with new materials and with new techniques, what we can do to reimagine the cities that we have, how those cities can be contributors in a world of more volatile climate in positive ways, how they can be a safe place for us to live and interact, and a place where fundamentally all of our ingenuity comes together to build what we need for the future. And I'm really delighted to have a fantastic grouping with me. So I'm going to do a very brief hello and intro in terms of who's here, and then I'm going to hand over to our host, Jamie from Holcim. So first you'll hear from Jamie from Holcim, then we have Kate Ascher, we have Eduardo Pizarro, Cristina Gamboa, we have Deborah Weintraub, and we are going to have quite a bit of conversation, including with Bertrand Piccard, who will surely give us insights beyond just what's happening in the built environment. So with that, Jamie, I'm going to hand over to you to give us a bit of an opener. And then from there, I'd like everybody to start the fires a bit for us. Jamie, all you.
Great. Thank you, Nat. Good morning and good afternoon to all of you. I'm Jamie Gentoso. I'm the Global Head of Solutions and Products, and I'm very happy to welcome you to this webinar as a part of this year's Climate Week NYC. Our company celebrates this week the first anniversary of our climate pledge, which we launched at Climate Week last year. We are the first ones in our sector to embark on this ambitious journey and put climate at the core of our work. And in a minute, I'll share some of the innovations that we've launched just in the last year. But before I do, I can't help but mention the effects of climate change that are accelerating and affecting our lives. The last months have been marked by extreme weather events, from high levels of heat to heavy rains, creating disastrous situations in cities all over. In fact, the National Weather Service issued its first ever flash flood warning in New York City area as a result of the recent Hurricane Ida. We have no other choice but to act rapidly, and we're deeply committed to providing solutions and accelerating the deployment of these solutions and supporting cities in their transition to a net zero society. Cities are fundamental enablers of this transformation. More than half the world's population lives in a city today, and that share is growing. By 2050, 2.5 billion more people will live in cities, and an estimated 60% of the infrastructure that is needed still remains to be built. So that means how we build our cities is critical. Buildings are the single largest contributor to CO2. So how we design, what materials are specified, and what we build matters. And as we build, we must consider the full building performance, not just the footprint of individual materials, but a full solution that can provide an efficient, resilient, durable, and a circular life. Many cities are committed to becoming climate neutral. We are fully supportive of these initiatives, such as the C40 Clean Construction Commitment that the City of Los Angeles has endorsed, and we're proud that their representative, Deborah Weintraub, is part of this panel to share their commitment today. At Holcim, our portfolio of products and solutions are committed to making cities greener from the foundation to the rooftop. We have developed a large range of green building solutions like eco-packed concrete, eco-packed green cement, making low carbon concrete construction possible at scale today. We are increasing energy efficiency in buildings with our insulating solutions. Up to 60% of a building's energy can be lost through its roof. With Firestone Building Products, we are at the forefront of sustainable buildings and high-performing roofing systems, such as green roofs, and solutions that make buildings far more efficient with high R-value insulation and high reflectivity. We also bring nature into cities and mitigate heat island effect. In the Paris suburbs, we have transformed a parking lot into an urban forest using permeable concrete called hydromedia. In rainy weather, water is able to reach to the soil and reserve the nourishing the trees, and it provides a cooling effect. This actually lowers the temperature by 2.5 degrees C overall the 24-hour period and up to 6 degrees in midday. With advanced technologies like 3D concrete printing, we are able to build more with less. In Malawi, Holcim has launched the world's first 3D concrete printed school. This took only 18 hours to build the walls and used 70% less materials than traditional building techniques. And we're convinced that no single actor can make this happen on its own. Cities have the power to accelerate the transformation towards net zero world by putting in place the right incentives. The change of traditional norms and standards will definitely play a key role in this transformation. We must adopt new lower carbon products and circular products much faster than ever. For instance, mandating the use of blended cements and concretes that include recycled construction materials or demolition waste. And measuring performance and how we get there is also key. For example, what is a building that's aligned with 1.5 degrees C in terms of its performance, and what does it need to achieve over its life cycle? Also, this also must be done in a material neutral manner. It's not a question of concrete or steel or wood, but one of life cycle performance that needs to be achieved, which itself will incentivize innovation from solutions providers like ourselves. And finally, procurement represents also a powerful tool that can help drive to net zero by integrating environmental criteria such as low carbon solutions, circularity, local manufacturing, etc. I'm excited to welcome our prestigious panel today and hear their views on this pressing topic, and I look very much forward to the conversation. Thank you.
Jamie, thank you so much. And you've actually helped us, I think, tremendously in framing the scope and scale of what we're talking about here, both in terms of the figures on what rate of urbanization we're still going to see, the very real and very apparent for everyone kind of immediate changes in the climate, not just sort of long-term projections, but things that we feel and see here and now. And also what you're already doing and what else needs to be done. And so we're going to enter a discussion here, but I'm going to ask each of our panelists to come in series and, as I say, sort of light the fires a little bit from your own perspective. We've got a range of practices here, a range of viewpoints. And so I'm really delighted to hear what we've got put together. So Kate, I'm going to begin with you. You do have a lecture to give towards the end of our session here. So you get the first word. Go ahead and light some fires for us. Give us your perspective and we'll get going.
Sure. Well, my perspective is probably comes from somebody who spent a bunch of time in government, both government and the private sector, but really thinking about, what might a net zero urban ecosystem as a whole look like, and what should government be doing to support it. And I really think about the built environment primarily as transport and buildings. That's not to say public space and other sorts of interventions in landscape architecture are unimportant, but I'm really thinking about building things. Transport is pretty straightforward, I think. We're talking about electric vehicles, that's vehicles of all types, cars, trucks, motorbikes, and of course, bicycles. So getting people away from fossil fuels and providing the infrastructure to do that seems to me what government knows it needs to do and is doing to a greater or lesser extent in different places. But providing incentives, I think, to change behavior is something that, again, this country is on the verge of trying to decide whether we're going to embrace it wholeheartedly in this tax bill or not. The other piece on the transport side, obviously, that government can do is thinking about planning and density, and really supporting the kind of density that is coming under criticism because of what's happened with COVID, but really remains the right answer for urban form going forward, in my view. As I think about buildings, I think about, again, kind of 4 categories where government can either mandate or provide incentives to move us along. One, of course, is in energy efficiency in energy usage. We're already there in some places with local laws that mandate new buildings must achieve certain targets. Here in a city like New York, we have a lot of old buildings, and actually dealing with those old buildings is in some senses the greater challenge. Things like smart metering, things like, building in certain technologies at the beginning of a building's life are obviously a direction we want to go. The big one, I think, is electrification, is basically only thinking about buildings of the future that are powered by electricity, that essentially plug into clean grids, that don't have boilers in the basement, and making sure that as we design buildings, we assume that that's what the future is going to look like. And that, of course, assumes that we have a grid that is clean itself, whether it's distributed, not distributed, the various sources. But that, I think, is incumbent upon government as well. I think Jamie mentioned the question of materials, both low carbon and circular materials. That's obviously a big thing. High performance materials, where you use less and get the same outcome. Anybody who knows the history of skyscrapers and the evolution of steel realizes that less can be more if it's the right material. That's an area where city performance standards really could start encouraging, incentivizing, and regulating the use of certain types of materials in the way that city regulations here in New York had done with energy efficiency. And the last piece, and I don't want to take too much of anybody's time, is really about adaptive reuse, is about encouraging people, businesses, developers not to tear down existing buildings, but rather to reuse them. Essentially, the carbon footprint of those buildings is now sunk. It's a sunk cost, as it were. And so actually thinking about how you might reuse them as a way to minimize the footprint of that new building is something that we do incentivize, perhaps not enough always. And I think government should be on the hook to encourage that kind of behavior as well. So that's just my little treatise on, if I ruled the world as a government, what kind of behaviors would I incentivize and how?
Thank you. That's a treatise on ruling the world, if you could, is actually a very nice way for us to start. Deborah, I'll ask you next, because you are a city engineer, so you have a lot of these things within your purview. So I'm curious to get your perspective and your vision on this.
Thank you. So just to place myself in the city, because I don't rule the world, I work in an organization that does capital delivery. So we're, where the rubber meets the road every day with infrastructure for the city of Los Angeles. And I have been on a 20-year journey to increase the efficiency and environmental performance of our projects. And we started by using LEED, or a standard, which was both a way to teach our staff what it means to think of buildings and projects in green terms. And we've slowly increased the standard that we're asking our projects to meet. We've also embraced Envision, because we're largely a civil engineering organization. So we're starting to rate our large infrastructure projects with that tool. And one of the roles I see that we play as a government, and certainly our mayor has been very supportive of this. We've embraced the C40 agenda. LA has a Green New Deal that spans, many of the things that Kate just talked through. From my perspective as an architect working in an engineering organization, we just keep pushing the bar higher and higher. We're now piloting some net zero energy projects, and every project we do is a learning experience for us, for our contractors. We work with typically pretty small contractors, so there's a lot of hand-holding. You specify a product and then discover that it's not available, and you still want the performance that you had intended. So it's a challenge every day to green our projects, but we as a city have demonstrated that you can build better, that you can build more efficiently, and that's the role that we need to continue to play as we've all, the California has been on fire every summer for the last 10 summers. So the climate change impacts are very evident. You walk outside and you smell the smoke in the air. Sometimes it's very hard, I will say, and to maintain the performance that you intended when you started. There's certain things in Los Angeles and our microclimate that are golden. Shade is golden here. Shade of any sort is golden here. Nighttime venting of buildings is also golden here. Doing natural ventilation to the farthest extent we can during the course of the day is also golden here. I also would just confirm what Kate said, that we need to stop building new. We just need to stop building new. We have an embodied carbon in a lot of existing facilities, and I often find myself in discussions with clients across the city trying to convince them that it's worth the investment in renovation, but we need to stop building new. So with that, I look forward to further conversation.
Thank you, Deborah. There's a lot in there for us to discuss coming up. I'm particularly interested in how you work with such a wide range of stakeholders, including ones that may themselves be interested in innovation but are not particularly big. For whom there's a very long tail of institutions that you deal with in terms of thinking about what's new and what can be done. But that's actually very helpful, and I personally like hearing that you're able to continually push all of your counterparties through this process. Cristina, you run the World Green Building Council. I would love to hear your perspective here.
Thank you very much. Hello, everyone. Yes, the World Green Building Council actually is a network that is present in 72 countries, green building councils. And I guess, and tuning into what Kate said and Deborah shared also from her professional experience, I would say that cities in particular have a lot of potential to materialize the net zero vision we need, so desperately need. But it does take a lot of, let's say, sensitivity that each city, each country has its own unique market and its own level of development. So I guess as we campaign forwards and we bring awareness, it's also important to know that or be mindful that the world is big and wide, and as we share principles, best tools, best practice, we have to be accommodating of those realities. Of course, we know that the best way forward for cities is an integrated approach to infrastructure that goes beyond the building silos, that unlocks the power of the energy transition, that of course rides the wave of the electric vehicle revolution. Buildings can also unlock all of that. But I guess the flavor that I would add to everything that has been said is that cities can be a great, let's say, vehicle for accelerating further, faster change than what's happening in the national governments and what we're going to probably see in the COP26 process of greater ambition, at least in this space. And just to start to kick it off, it's cities and governments also, beyond being policymakers, are major real estate and infrastructure asset owners, and they can direct the direction of travel. They can create more demand for what Jamie was saying. We need more life cycle analysis. We need more environmental product declarations, and that we think about the performance of the solutions, not if it's with XY material or XY technology. Again, it goes again to place, culture, country, and so that has to be brought also into mind. And of course, there's a lot of, we have a carbon budget, a big carbon budget. We have to think about how to account for it as we do with our finances. And cities must be starting in that journey. And I guess the embodied carbon conversation is going in that direction. And just for an example, the city of Oslo is already going into fuel-free construction commitments and rolling that out. And so industry is stepping up to the call, and then it's about collaboration, how those signals from city unlocks opportunity, how that opportunity creates demand. And then we ride also on the possibility of companies that want to sell better products, better solutions, better access to data to empower us as citizens to make better choices too.
Fantastic, Cristina. Thank you very much. I think this is very relevant. We all have different speeds and different capabilities of movement depending on where we are. But I do think, and you give an indication of this, that there is interest everywhere. So with that, actually, Eduardo, we would love to hear your perspective. Welcome, and please give us a few words to kick things off here.
Thanks. It's an honor to be here. So thanks to Holcim Foundation, and you all. I'm looking forward to the chat. As a designer, I would like to put a perspective into the role of design and designers in building net zero futures. So of course, we need to discuss topics related to infrastructures, networks, systems as energy, transport, materials. But I do believe that we need to deeply articulate that to a good quality design. For example, it's a pity if we apply a high efficiency engine in a badly designed car, right? So how do we face, I do believe we need to face the cities as both tool and solutions for tackling global warming and climate change. And I also believe that solutions are not exactly in the buildings. Instead, they are in the spaces in between them. So instead of seeing these spaces as leftover voids, we should see them as spaces full of opportunities for wind, sun, people, political demonstrations. And then we could really design or redesign these spaces in order to unveil that hidden power. It's a kind of something that we don't see, we don't touch it, but it's a potential invisible infrastructure of changing the city. And I brought the topic of design, but how do we measure its quality? And how do we measure its impact? So of course, first, we have to, it relies on the context. And after that, design has to deal with many paradigms. So I made a list, for example, global versus local, machine versus human, thinking about design and construction, generic versus specific, new versus retrofitted, we are already talking about it, mono versus multifunctional design and use, immutable and versus adaptable, exclusive, non-accessible versus accessible, and user versus usability, how to use that, how to know that design, how to appropriate that. And ultimately, to close my speech now, I'd like to state that design quality should follow diversity at the same time that promotes equality. We need to look at that, right? Thank you.
Thank you, Eduardo. You've basically given me all the things for us to talk about for the rest of the session. Thank you. I actually really quite appreciate those pairings of terms and ideas, because I think that's actually hugely important, and that kind of evidentiary thinking can be really helpful as we look ahead. Bertrand, thank you for joining us. I'd love to hear your perspective. We all would. Perhaps maybe a bit broader than just the built environment, but please give us a few thoughts, please.
Yes, with pleasure. Hello to everyone. Jamie gave some examples of solutions that Holcim is implementing. And I believe that when all the solutions existing today will be implemented globally, then we will be able to say that the world is modern, that the world is efficient. But we have to admit, honestly, that today, it is absolutely not the case. The world is living in the past. The technologies that we use everywhere and that we see beside our latest smartphone or computer are all technologies that were implemented 100 years ago in the beginning of the oil era. We are using thermal engines that are 27% efficient. It means it loses 73% of the gasoline from the tank, when the electric engines of Solar Impulse are 97% efficient, losing only 3%. We live in buildings that are badly insulated, badly built. We live in a world where heating, cooling, lighting systems are outdated and inefficient. Old industrial processes, dirty ways to burn fossil fuels to produce electricity, heat or movement. Well, we have to be honest. We are living in the past. So today, if we want to be sustainable, if we want to reach the targets of 1.5 degrees set by the Paris Agreement, we need to change everything. We need to replace all this dirty and old stuff we still use by the modern, clean, and efficient technologies. So there are two ways to do that. Either it is expensive It needs a lot of money to do it, and nobody will do it. And we will continue to live in the past and face a disaster in the future, or it is profitable to do it. And if it's profitable, then everybody is going to do it. But we have to show it, because today there are still far too many NGOs and even politicians who say protection of the environment is expensive. Protection of the environment needs degrowth. It needs sacrifice in mobility, construction, consumption, production, growth. And people don't want to make any sacrifice. So we have to really study the situation. Is it profitable or is it expensive? And we have done this work since 5 years with the Solar Impulse Foundation, identifying up to date 1,300 technological solutions that are financially profitable to protect the environment. So it really means that if we change all the infrastructures by the modern clean technologies that exist in big corporations like Holcim, but also in small startups, we have all the technology needed. It is profitable, it creates jobs. And this, I believe, is the biggest leverage to have a change. In other words, today, we need to decouple the GDP from the quantity of the consumption that is leading to an ecological disaster in order to recouple the GDP with the quality of the efficiency, the quality of the efficiency that is now a product that we can sell thanks to all the new technologies that exist. And I think this is a message that we have to give to every people, to the investors, of course, to the industry, to the users, but also to the politicians. Because if the politicians were reluctant until now to take real ambitious measures to protect the environment, it's because they were thinking that it would cost too much and it would make people unemployed. And we have to prove them that it's exactly the opposite. It's the business opportunity of the century to protect the environment. And because cities are producing a huge part of the CO2 emissions, of course, we have to target the cities first now to show how many more jobs and how much more increase in GDP we can do by making cities modern, with modern solutions, modern technologies, modern building, and modern way to live.
Bertrand, thank you very much. It's a fantastic and very comprehensive vision for the future. Jamie, I'm curious if you'd like to get a word in here.
Yeah, Bertrand, what you said is absolutely true. We are living in the past. And I always like to share, I started with Holcim 20 years ago, or just over 20 years ago. And at the time, one of my roles was to work with specifiers to try to drive the use of lower carbon products, blended cements and such. And here we are 20 years later doing the same kind of thing. And, I think some of these solutions and some of the products I talked about just a few moments ago have been around for some time, but the issue is adoption, right? And we are, we're building buildings that are 100 stories high, holding back millions and millions of gallons of water with some of these products. So it's understandable that engineers, architects, and even contractors are slow to adapt. But that's really what we need to change, is the adoption rate of all of these new products, and people need to try them and trust that they will work for years and years and years. And companies like Holcim have developed these products and will stand behind them. So I think that is one of the biggest issues that we have, is adoption of these products. So again, they've been around, they've proven themselves, but they have not, we don't have contractors that are willing to take a chance to utilize them.
Thank you, Jamie. And Bertrand, I'm curious, you've been doing this for some time. And you paint, I think, a picture that increasingly people are going to get behind. But how has this changed? How has the perception of what you've said changed over time? I mean, has it gone from seeming relatively less receptive audience to more? I mean, give us a picture so that we can think about this in the next coming decades as to how people might change their mind and might see things happening differently.
Yes, I believe that 10 years ago, there was not many solutions to solve the climate and environmental problem. 5 years ago, there started to be solutions, but they were hardly profitable. And the increase in profitability has been spectacular. You know, the price of solar photovoltaic electricity has been divided by 30 in the last 15 years. So it's absolutely spectacular. And now we can finally tell to people that these technologies are profitable, but they are still in the mindset that it is expensive. So we have to show the trend, and the trend is not only new technologies, but it's really the decrease of price which increases the profitability. And this is, I think, a big incentive for a lot of people, because the language of the world today, it's about job creation, it's about profit, it's not only about protecting the environment. And this is why it is so important that the mindset of the people changes, and that the people are informed about what these technologies offer today in terms of GDP, job creation, and profit.
I think this is very important. And I was a solar analyst many years ago, and once a solar analyst, always a solar analyst. You never get the lessons or the heartache of some of it out of your blood. But no, this rotation from it being expensive and scarce to being abundant and not just cheap, but oftentimes the least expensive option in the world, I think is an extremely important one to take. I mean, we can see technologies improve over time, but amazingly, you still have to message that. You still have to go out and tell people. And what's so fascinating, and I think this is a lesson we should all explore here in a moment, is that obviously people are actually doing it. We've had, by the math I've looked at, about $1.5 trillion worth of investment in the solar sector in the last 10 years. So clearly money is flowing. It's not that no one's doing it. So let me analogize that for the group. So how, and I'll look first to Kate and to Deborah about this. How do you best convey the notion of where things are right now? When you have some inertias, shall we say, in systems that you deal with, how do you convey to people what we're capable of right now, what's already being done, not just the long future, but right now with what we have? Kate, you first. Like, how do we do this?
Well, you know, I hate to be crass, but you know,
it's okay.
As you think about the world that has to embrace these things, developers of a variety of things have to embrace it. So two answers. The first answer is government and government procurement is something that one can control and can sometimes pave the way, do proof of concept, and encourage people to believe that certain new technologies work, both cost effectively and in terms of outcome. So, you know, if government puts their money where their mouth is on a new technology, even if it's piloting something and it doesn't quite work out, that seems to me to be absolutely fundamentally required and doesn't always cost a lot. The second piece I would just say is incentives, because if people are going to go out of their comfort zone financially, then it helps if somebody's there to grease the wheels a little bit and protect them. And most governments have the ability in one way, shape, or form to subsidize new efforts to encourage new practices. Obviously, some are wealthier than others, but I feel like between those two things, government taking the lead and its own building projects, and then encouraging the private sector to do it by providing a financial safety net. That's what I would say. I'd turn it over to Deborah to, you know, correct me if I'm wrong.
Thanks, Deborah.
Kate, you're totally right. We need to lead by example. And with our own projects, as I said, for us, it's been a 20-year journey, and we need to incentivize. The question about affordability, Bertrand, is something that I discuss every day with my clients. They'll say, we need this facility, just give us a facility and we'll do the PV later. You know, we'll get to the on-site generation. Actually, with climate change, it's made that argument a little easier of late because the power grid goes down. And so if we can build facilities that can continue to operate independent of the grid, for our recreation facilities, for example, where in a heat emergency, people know the air conditioning will still be on and they'll be safe and comfortable. But it's an argument every day, every single day about where the money is put and where the money is spent. Unfortunately, I think we've been pretty proactive. Recently, I was on a panel to judge local building designs, Eduardo, and some of them were quite beautiful. But of the, I don't know, 300 projects or so that we designed, almost none of them talked about their emphasis on sustainability, carbon neutrality, advanced materials. So I was very disappointed to see that. I think that to some extent, the design discussions have moved away from sustainability, and that's disappointing to me. And I think government can play a role by continuing to say, if it's not sustainably designed, it's not designed. It's not well put together. One of the other things I just would mention is because we also design infrastructure, we're always looking for opportunities for new materials, and we set standards for materials, for specifications in our projects that a large part of the Western US uses. So our review of new concrete mixes is very important to a lot of our colleagues. And we put a lot of effort into looking at new products, making sure they're going to operate for the, stand up for the long term, that they won't need to be replaced quickly, and trying to make sure that they don't fail too quickly, since once we've made an investment, there's always more need. It's hard to go back and redo something. So I think you're absolutely right, Kate. We need to show by example, and we need to give incentives, and we continuously need to push the bar, push the goals higher and higher.
Thank you, Deborah. It's interesting to hear you say that that climate change has made the case for the climate resilient infrastructure more clear. Like it's less sort of academic, and it's definitely less abstract. But I'm curious about how you said that the sustainability element has sort of decreased in these conversations you're having. Tell me a little bit more about that, because frankly, it's a bit surprising to me.
It was very surprising to me.
Okay.
These are projects by my community of architects and engineers in Southern California. And I'm not really sure why these projects are not touting their response to the energy crisis, to the climate crisis. I'm really not sure. I mean, I think these things go in waves, and I was just shocked. I mean, some of the projects that touted their responsiveness to our local climate and their ability to build efficiently were the ones that were the least cost projects, like supportive housing for the homeless. So the folks that took the equity issues most seriously also took the sustainability and carbon neutrality issues most seriously. The projects that were being built for the well-off and wealthy just didn't seem to care anymore. So, having been in this arena for, 35 years plus, we have a lot of work to do, Bertrand. We have a lot of work to do to make sure that the message is fresh and is crucial. And, we continue to challenge the young folks, Eduardo, that there's no choice but to do this. So I'm sometimes I get very disheartened seeing just how much of the conversation has shifted. I'm not really sure, though.
It is fascinating to me, though, but it does point a bit to, maybe I'm being overly hopeful, a bit towards Bertrand's position that, like, this has become actually fundamental to the most economic of operations, the ones where potentially you have the most exposure to economic conditions. Therefore, those are the ones where people are thinking most sustainably. But you did raise, and rightly so, I think what younger people would think of this. And so, Eduardo, I would welcome your thoughts here, and then Cristina's, yours as well. But Eduardo, please.
I have many points that I'm.
Please go for it.
Here. But anyway, from this point, it's really sad when we see that many times we see sustainability being used as something fashionable, and once it's not more fashionable, people keep aside. It cannot be like that. But we see kind of the emptiness growing inside the term many times. We have to fight that. There's another point going back to the role of government. It's very important. It's very challenging. And in my context, you should be aware the situation in Brazil, dealing with the government is a very difficult situation. So how do we, I could even bring like a question for us, how do we deal with these challenges, which could be deeper or more struggling in different contexts to play the role of government? And another point, it's very strong, and I do agree with Bertrand when he said about we are living in the past. But at the same time, I was thinking about it, and many times, perhaps one way to lead us to the future is looking a bit to the past, but not the ordinary past, the one we are used to, but looking for visionary models from the past. So when I say to you about the in-between spaces and that infrastructural potential of this in-between spaces, it comes to my mind Iona Friedman's special village. So it's a different approach from the past that perhaps could give some clues to us to think about the future. So these are the 3 points that I bubbling in my mind now.
Thank you. Tell us a bit more about the Friedman, if you will, for those of us who may not be quite so expert.
It's an approach to bring life to the spaces in between building. So it's a way to bring materiality. So it's a kind of a structure, a whole infrastructure, big building. It's turning the emptiness into a building, but it's kept like as a good balance between buildings and voids. So they have natural light, sun access, ventilation. It's very bold perspective. And nowadays, in a more artistic way, we also see Tomás Saraceno, which has his cloudy cities. It's a way to inhabit this space with quality. And once, let's say, if we have a good infrastructure outside, we have good ventilation, it brings a better microclimate, at the same point that brings better performance indoors as well. So it merges the different scales, I think.
Thank you very much. Cristina, you can throw in some ideas to what Eduardo said, but also to Deborah, please. What Deborah said, I would love to hear your reflections on both of those.
Yes, thank you. Well, I guess the sustainability movement has come a long way, and this decarbonization journey we're now in is a tougher one than we had when we were addressing sustainability first. So we're up to a bigger challenge as the IPCC reports now are clear and clear of this is the only way to go. I would add something about the reflections about cities and the built environment and why maybe it seems that we are living in the past, as Bertrand was saying, and not unlocking the future that cities and we deserve. I guess the cities in general and the construction industry maybe have been a little bit conservative, but I think it's because of a lack of information and data. I think honestly that cities have to start at zero, and to start at zero, they have to have some sort of energy performance-based codes that they have to be unlocking data about the performance of buildings. If you tell me if my cell phone is burning and I see it burning and I have data, I'm going to change it. If I don't understand that my buildings are burning and I don't have data about them, I don't understand the energy consumption. I don't understand that the systems are interconnected, that if I choose X windows with these walls or whatever, it changes the performance, the comfort. There has to be something that we have to address that gap. So worldwide, there are not many cities have codes that are unlocking that future. So yes, this is profitable, but businesses are willing to take on this direction, and without activating an ambition loop where cities and governments say what is the policy regulation, are clear with the master plans. How are they going to be thinking of their cities? What is the data of the performance of the cities? In the US, some of you have that luxury of having data, but it's just a minimal fraction of what the world is standing. So we need to encourage that the cycle repeats, that the business innovation finds and materializes net zero as the biggest opportunity of this decade, that governments from the national level have leveled the playing field in terms of committing to more ambitious regulation in the nationally determined contributions of the Paris Agreement, becoming serious of buildings as a critical climate solution. It represents 40% of energy-related carbon emissions worldwide, for God's sakes. It's the biggest sector that consumes energy. And so let's start basic. Energy efficiency first. Let's get renewables into the conversation. Electrify buildings, and of course, I resonate with everything that Eduardo and Deborah says, because that's eventually it's about people. It's about how we live. It's our quality of life. But we need practical solutions to reducing those emissions, addressing inefficiencies, investing in low carbon design, promoting demand for better products, and of course, making the industry know what is their emissions, because that's also another thing. As they are committing and making commitments on net zero, this, that, there has to be disclosure, transparency, and that we make everyone accountable, businesses, cities, governments, and we connect the dots. And I think data will do that for us, but we need big sector collaboration from everyone, every discipline to make that happen.
Thank you very much. I'm always intrigued by the data-related discussions, like how good are the data that we have right now, and how interested are companies in actually knowing it about themselves or in general? What's your take on that?
Me? Oh, I think
for you.
Interested. Oh, yeah.
Good.
So I would say World GBC has this in 2018. We started the net zero journey with our network, and we called for a net zero carbon buildings commitment that we just upgraded to whole life carbon, meaning we're asking everyone to be accountable that is a signatory to address the whole life carbon performance of infrastructure. Infrastructure is going to be with us not 10, 20 years, not 2 years like my cell phone, or 5 years, who knows? It's going to be here 80, 100 years. So the decisions being designed today will be with us for 100 years. So if we're not doing it right today, it has a huge impact. Actually, the state of California is a signatory of our commitment, and we work with C40 and the cities that have signed on. And they are every year reporting, tracking progress, and together we're figuring it out. Those 28 cities are collaborating and learning from each other. What are they doing? Enacting better regulation, as the one I mentioned from Oslo, for example, which is exceptional, but also shortening the learning curve between businesses in terms of how do they get their assets decarbonized? How do they make their paths in, for example, addressing a renovation of a building and not making it hugely intensive again in a carbon budget? So I think there are silver linings, and at COP26 in particular, we have come with a great coalition of partners that are radically collaborating to showcase that there are conversations happening, but we need more of that in the transparency, the data, and the disclosure part of things, so this can grow and that we can affect more and more people or get them inspired to be in this journey with us.
Thank you very much, Cristina. Jamie.
I can comment from a business perspective in terms of data.
Please.
We see data as a huge opportunity for us. And over the last few years, we've really uplifted our digital organization. We actually have a group called the Makers that help us find digital solutions. One of the things that we've come out with, just to give an example, is an application called Concrete Direct that we can utilize, our customers can utilize to actually order concrete. But one of the things that we can see from it is how long they're making our trucks wait on site. So we can have a conversation with our customer, and especially those customers that are interested in their CO2 footprint, to say, hey, you need to do a better job ordering because I've got trucks idling on your site for 60 minutes. And so they can actually see that. Previously, we didn't have the data to show them that. So we can help our business get far more efficient, help our customers get more efficient with this data. And it's just a matter of looking at it in some cases. So we've really realized the strength that data can give our organization, make us better, make our customers better, from a sustainability perspective, but from also many other perspectives. So it's an amazing thing once you really start utilizing it.
Data is good. Kate, I know you've got to hop in a moment, but briefly, if you can, Unless you've left us already. Nope, you're still here for a moment?
Yeah, no, that's just, believe it or not, I'm in a sweaty office and I have to turn the air conditioner that's about vintage 1955. Talk about relics of, you know.
I was going to say, that's a whole other part of our conversation. But just real briefly, like if you could give us one last take on what universities can do, like how can you embed this sort of these priorities and imperatives into the university setting? Well, academically, that would be really helpful. Like, what do you think needs to be done with that before you go off and teach?
That's a really interesting question. I mean, it's interesting because as I'm sitting in an office at in a building called Fairweather at Columbia that is one of the oldest and I would say has a reputation for one of the worst buildings at Columbia. And you compare the energy performance or anything else of this building with the new buildings that are being built on the new Manhattanville campus, and it really is like night and day. And so I do think it's incumbent upon universities to think about how they can take their building stock and really try to use it as a template for the future. And you know, Columbia is making its efforts, and there's a big task force on sustainability, and obviously it's a huge thing for everybody. But I would say that universities, and particularly wealthy private universities, hold aside public ones, have this. I hate to say it, it happens in other industries as well. This edifice complex. You know, somebody donates money. Right. And they want to put their name on a building. This is what happens in this country anyway. And so they get a beautiful spanking brand new building, but there's no money to retrofit or upgrade older buildings. And as a result, you look at brain science and they've got a beautiful building. I'm sure it's super energy efficient. I was involved in the permitting of the Manhattanville campus when I worked for the city. But if you look at these older buildings, they're a tragedy. And they don't need to be that way, but there's no money for that. So I think there are issues at private universities, there are issues at public universities, because they, of course, are more financially constrained. Having said that, because they are public, both universities and colleges, they fall into that category of should we be leaders, should we use the public procurement process to demonstrate new things? So I feel like it's a huge sector to tackle, partly because you do have certain private institutions that are, you know, kind of conceptually committed to this, but really need to actually move the needle to show people what can be done, and do have the resources to do it, because it's not strictly about the profit motive. So I think it's a great sector, and I'm glad you brought it up, to actually kind of pave the way for other industries. And by the way, a lot of the people who give money to these universities are captains of industry in other industries, right, that can learn and bring those messages back to the building industry, the real estate industry, the construction industry, whatever it is. So I think it's a really good area to mine.
I appreciate that. And the edifice complex is definitely real. No one gets their name on a retrofitting contract, unfortunately, because you probably can't really see it. Well, Kate, thanks so much for your insights. Thank you for joining us. And we've got quite a number of good questions that have started to flow in here, and so I'm going to begin asking some of them. And this is one that's sort of broad and general, and I'd like to sort of kick this to everybody, which is, since the construction industry is very conservative and still uses a lot of old technology materials, obviously, but like how practically can we change this? Like I feel, Bertrand, like this directs a little bit towards you. But I'd be also interested in hearing from everyone else. If it is an inherently conservative industry, looking at multi-decade or even one-century timelines, how do we go about changing this? And there's a second subsidiary part of that question, which is who pays for that? Bertrand, I'd like to hear from you first.
With pleasure. You know, in general, human beings don't like to change spontaneously. They want to stay in their comfort zone. They want to stay in what they know and control. So to have people change, you need two things. You need either a crisis that obliges them to change. And this is actually what happens with the environmental and the climate crisis. Or you need an incentive to change. And the incentive very often is about fame, about reputation, about re-election if it's a politician, or profit if it is a company. So what can be the real incentive today to use the data to use the technologies, I think it is already to avoid a big misunderstood that people always make because they are not good financial people. They make a confusion between cost and investment. So when we say that we have to build an energy neutral building or to take an electric bus, of course, the capex, the investment in the beginning, is higher than to buy a diesel bus or to make a shitty building. But it's an investment. You pay a little bit more in the beginning. The cost is when you lose the money. The investment is when you put money and you get more money afterward. So you have, for example, the city of San Jose in the Silicon Valley, who has calculated that if you have a diesel bus, it's cheaper in the beginning. But if you have an electric bus, you have $400,000 more at the end of the 10-year period. If you make an energy neutral building, you have much more money after 10 years than if you have a shitty building. So you see, what we have to calculate is the total cost of ownership. This is what we have to present. You make a new building, you make an investment. What will be the money that you save over 10 years? And if you do that, you will be able to invest. And today, it's the best moment to have money to invest. The money is cheap. The interest rates are sometimes negative. So we will not have a second chance like this one, where the technology is profitable, the technologies save the climate and save the environment, and at the same time, the money is cheap. We invest and we get more money back. So we really have to go for it and to explain the basic rules of economy. Because when the people understand that, they will all go for sustainable cities, buildings, and mobility.
Bertrand, I greatly appreciate the optimism, and I think it's very concise. I would add that the total cost of ownership calculations, coupled with the notion that money is always being invested, that all expectations of these are around it returning something to investors, is important. But Deborah, you're a city engineer. How does this resonate with you?
So Bertrand, that's an argument that, of course, is very powerful and has great meaning. On the other hand, we budget annually for capital investments, and we budget annually separately for maintenance. So the two really never meet. And so, you can argue that spending 10% more upfront will save you operating costs of a much greater amount over time, but then I hear from my city colleagues who budget, that's fine, Deborah, that's nice. But, if we spend an extra $5 million here, we can't put it somewhere else. So partially, what I find myself doing is, first of all, we do projects where the lowest bidder builds the project. So we get the contractor who has given the cheapest cost. So our projects need to be very simple. Our technologies need to be simple. And if we're going to maintain a new technology, because we work with city employees who have been around and maintaining our buildings for years, we have to be very conscious of training them on what these new technologies are. Or I've gone back to projects and discovered, the high efficiency heat pump that we put in was taken out. It was just, we finished, we walked away and it disappeared. And they put something in that they were more comfortable with. So we have to keep things simple in municipal projects. That's my opinion. And in Southern California, maybe in Brazil too, through good design, you can do a lot, through proper orientation, through landscaping in between, through natural ventilation, you can do a lot through good design. So it's hard for me, while I totally support what you said, Bertrand, about, total costs of a project, it's hard to argue that. It's very hard for me to convince people of that with this separation of budget and the annual budgeting.
Thank you. I think that's very, very much on point. Eduardo, Deborah was kind enough to sort of give a nod to you, so please give us a perspective from Brazil.
Deborah, I do believe that many things should be simpler and simpler. So yes, in Brazil, we have a good weather, let's say. And then if we have very simple architecture, it opens up and it's good inside and outside. So let's keep simple. It's much better. It's a good guideline. And thinking about the investment with the previous question, I think it's very important to combine the point of a good design, good quality design, and the rules for the investment. So it's important to be aware, not making like a top-down investment, a more like within investment, paying attention to the social, cultural, and humane layers together in that process, like in a more participatory process. And also with this kind of the investments or the strategies or the guidelines, when they touch people, when they touch the communities, it's very important to make them visible. Why not to make them playful, fun? Because that's, I think, a good way to bring awareness for people and the sense of belonging. And then that's bring value to the investment. It's all together. Did I make myself clear? It's more merged. I think it's important to pay that into account in a context like mine, like Latin America as well.
No, absolutely. Very good. I've got another one. And Jamie, I'm going to direct this to you first, and then I'd like to hear, I think, from Cristina, which is, how would a carbon price play a role here? Like, is this essential? Is it a bonus? Is it a nice to have? Here politically in the United States, of course, it's a very fraught concept, but I'd be curious to hear what role that would play in changing what gets built and how people act.
So I think it would definitely change the way people act and what they do and how they build and what they value, right? Because right now we value the lowest cost in a building, right? And we need to start to value the carbon footprint of that building. So I think we are in favor of a price on carbon, no matter which direction it goes. In terms of actual price or carbon trading or whatever, but we think it's important. And if we are going to progress towards net zero, we think it's a good way to enhance investment, in carbon capture and that kind of thing, as well as further R&D into having materials that are lower carbon. So I think it can and will play an important role at some point. As you mentioned, the US isn't quite there yet,
right?
But I think it will be a reality at some point in the future. And companies like ourselves are ready to embrace it. I actually sit on a panel or a group called the CEO Climate Dialogue, where we have sat a couple times with a bipartisan group of Congress and talked to them about the fact that we would like to see a price on carbon. Obviously, there are some things that we'd like to see along with it, making sure that it's, durable, making, in the end, from a business perspective, we need to be able to count on policy that's put in place. Large investments will need to be made if we move in that direction, and we need to make sure that, what they're looking at will actually be in place for the long term. So we are, as I mentioned, in favor of it. Think it's an important part of progressing toward a net zero society, and we'll embrace it when it comes.
I have to, yes, echo your comment about durability. It may be paradoxically unhelpful to have a near-term high price that then goes to nothing. It doesn't actually enable any particular planning horizon. It doesn't allow people to be durable in what they do and then to think in the long term. But Cristina, I would be curious to get your perspective on that.
Yes, thank you. I agree with Jamie, and so not to repeat, I think there's also something that can add to the conversation and why the carbon tax also will improve a movement of green finance or the responsible investment movement and the ESG reporting that will also help address Deborah's lack of support into better infrastructure and investments. There is a great momentum in terms of supporting better disclosure through ESG transparency. I'm going back to data, but through that transparency, investors in real estate are making better choices in what asset classes, what performance of buildings are they investing. So buildings are receiving a brown discount for their specificities. And the carbon performance is starting to be highlighted there, and there's more disclosure, more understanding. And as that happens, that will support the carbon tax, because then we will know the carbon tax will help then investors even better understand how to divest from XY asset classes that don't make sense. And also support regulations that are coming down hardly on very inefficient buildings, like the regulation that's in New York, and better support that transition and that renovation without going into a high intensity into the future. So there's definitely there. It has a lot of potential. We need better information to unlock the full benefits, but it's going to be really positive to further decarbonize cities and infrastructure.
Fantastic, thank you. We have another very good question here. This is a very important one as well. And this is like, how do we embed the most fragile parts of our society in these discussions? I'm thinking in particular here of Gilets Jaunes in France, like the movements that are protesting cost, even if the benefit of what might be coming is generally in everybody's interest. So Eduardo, I would like to start with you. Like, how do we ensure that we are embedding the most fragile parts of our society in these discussions and in our thinking and planning, beyond, I should say, not just discussion, but actual planning?
Well, I would say that if you're talking about the planning or touching the design as well, a very important ability or concept is scalability. So this capacity to have the same goal depending on the context, there's adaptation depending on the context. For example, I think it's fascinating to see, not exactly planning, I'll go a little bit to arts, but we could see the example of Olafur Eliasson. So for example, on one hand, he deals with the climate, with education, with the weather project presented at Tate Modern in London. On the other hand side, we have Olafur Eliasson with the Little Sun project, which is a small object. I don't know if you have seen it before.
I have one at home.
Oh yeah, good.
Yeah, I've got one.
Good. It's a small object, really funny as well, which could be used to bring light to children in developing countries, not just for them, but anyway, it's an approach for this kind of similar goal, but with scalability. And when we think, for example, about when Bertrand brings the sun power in an e-scale with goals, specific goals, we have other ways, thinking about scalability as well, to apply the sun power or the photovoltaic panels in rooftops, in favelas in Rio de Janeiro, in Brazil. So I think the best way is to discuss scalability, and this scalability could go back to what I said before. Then we need to, that design with scalability should promote equality, but highlighting that diversity should be appropriate, should be suitable.
Thank you. Deborah, I'd be curious to hear what you think.
So in my experience in going, when we do our projects, we do a lot of community outreach and a lot of community discussions. And my experience with going to communities where the needs are great is that if you explain that the objectives are to design and build a project that have the highest goals, and this relates to what Bertrand and Cristina was saying in terms of efficiency and operation, and in terms of how that particular community would prefer to use that facility. I've never had any problem with the community members embracing that concept. We have to describe it in terms that are not technical, that someone who hasn't had a technical background can understand. So we go back to very basic descriptions about, where do you want the sun to hit? How do you want to be protected from the rain? What is the path of travel for you with your families to get to this facility? So these small projects embedded in communities, some of great need, I find in some ways the most exciting to do, because the conversations, people get very engaged, very excited about the potential. even again, trying to keep it simple, but just to have them feel what it's going to be like once we walk away, to inhabit that space in a way that is adaptive to the environment they're in. So I have found in some ways those conversations in the communities of greatest need are more fruitful than the communities we go into where people are quite well off and are skeptical, are doubtful, have a lot of demands. So I'm in some ways the projects where we're speaking to communities where they just haven't had the investment is a much easier conversation to have. And the other thing I will say, and that this is another role of government, we tend to invest in silos. So we'll invest, there's a bucket of money for streets, and there's a bucket of money for sewers and stormwater, right? So I have looked for opportunities to try to bring those buckets together. For example, we're building a $500 million bridge, a new bridge, which is quite a spectacular structure, the 6th Street Viaduct. So $500 million bridge. And in order to build this bridge, we spent $100 million on property to get a new alignment. What's below this bridge is 12 acres of land that we now own to build the bridge. And so we pursued a park and an open space, and it's quite an eccentric park because it's on both sides of the river, and a lot of it's under the bridge itself. And that park will be maybe $20 million, so a fraction of the bridge cost. But thinking of that structure as part of the park structure, we were able to incorporate into the bridge ways to go from the bridge deck down to the park and back up. So the bridge, in my mind, for the community is really going to be an exercise facility, an exercise structure where you can run across, run down, up the ramp, downstairs, and integrated with the park below. So sustainability to me, in my mind, is every opportunity we can to bring these buckets together to produce a greater and better whole.
Deborah, thank you. It's both very practical, but also very poignant, I think, to talk about how you ask questions of the community in a way that are simple and straightforward and very human. And I find that actually very, very helpful as a way for thinking about this. But Cristina, I would love to get your perspective.
Well, I was hearing you speak also, Deborah. I was thinking from my home country of Colombia, some great work from architects like Giancarlo Massanti. And forgive me, I'm an economist, so that's why maybe I'm better at the carbon tax. But if I may,
that's okay.
Social sustainability side of things, which brings a lot of passion also to the work I do. Giancarlo, for example, takes the opportunity to do a school, and with that school, he builds a facility that can be used 24 hours a day, not only for the school, and intervenes the whole neighborhood and makes it a space of appropriation. And then in the weekends, it can have other uses, and it transforms the community, even though it may be very underserved. So cities have that opportunity, those places that Eduardo was mentioning, those in-betweens, make a huge change in terms of sense of place and of course, a sense of belonging and well-being. And if we get right, better education and better sensitivity of what could be also in terms of improvements, I do see, for example, again, going back a little bit to the heart, cities, investment, procurement, or even the subsidies that go into affordable housing. There could be greater awareness that cities can promote, that there is sensitivity in passive design and the low tech solutions, good design, passive design, that all these homes that in the developing world are going to happen at least have good ventilation. And if you think of COVID, it's just common sense, but it doesn't happen sometimes. So just promote good quality, enable infrastructure to be net zero ready if you want. If you don't want to, I know we're resource constrained, but that doesn't curb ingenuity. There can be that possibility of design being enabled when renewables and electrification can happen, and not getting people fall behind in what's going to happen with weather, with the changing weather. Places are going to get hotter, are going to be cooler, and buildings either are not being future-proof today and designed for the future climate, they're being designed for the past. So there has to be some great alignment of disciplines, of practitioners, to get the jigsaw puzzle and better sensitivity that we can make better places for people.
Thank you very much. So this is a very, I think, a very fruitful set of questions for us to be asking. So we're coming towards the end of our question time, and I like to close something like this with a question of my own. We have the unique framework here of talking about a durable environment, one that with things we build now could be with us for the rest of our lifetimes or beyond, and the lifetimes of our children and grandchildren. That's a long time to think about, so I'll pull it back a little bit. So we're here in the year 2031. All of us have gathered again 10 years from now. And we're discussing where we are. We're discussing the state of climate, the state of resilient cities. And I'm curious to hear from each of you what we're talking about. So the year is 2031, and we're discussing the same topic. Each take a couple of minutes, and Jamie, I'll start with you. It's 10 years from now. We're talking about climate and resilient cities. We're talking about the built environment. What are we talking about?
Wow, I think the world is changing so much so quickly, even over the last 5 years. I mean, you think about,
Right.
I think the iPhone came out 12 years ago, and now you can't imagine your life without it, or
That's
what
right.
it would be like. But the future in 10 years, from a building perspective, I see a future, when you think of cities, like you see behind me, just, green landscape, the building fits in seamlessly, all public transportation underground, little impact, buildings that are, sustainable in themselves, they're off the grid. And I think it's really exciting to think about where we could go if we could see people truly embrace, what things could be if we don't, right? So I think we've got the technology to get there, and we can get there. It just takes all of the people on this panel and all the other stakeholders, contractors, GCs, and owners to commit to it. So
Do you think they will? Do you think in 10 years' time they will be committed?
I think so. I don't think there's any other choice.
Okay.
I think the world is changing. And, I mentioned before, I've been in the construction and the concrete industry my entire career, and things are happening much faster over the last year and a half than I have ever seen them happen over the last 20. So that's where my positivity comes in on this, that I think that we will see change happen much faster.
I appreciate that. Cristina, what do you say?
I am happy to be living in 2031 because
Good.
I believe engineers have a net zero calculator in every decision they make in infrastructure. I believe that cities are having it solved out in terms of being regenerative, bringing in nature back into cities, making them greener, that we have a balance of the green infrastructure in our cities. But also, I think businesses are all signed up to making a positive contribution and finding ways to work collaboratively for policy to also unlock that future. And I guess also bringing quality of life, right? And that we avoid more crises and the biodiversity crisis, and that we step up the quality of our cities so we can have the future we deserve without leaving anyone behind. I'm so an optimist too.
I appreciate that. I mean, I think if you have to build, you have to have some optimism. There's not much of a way to pessimistically go about building, or for that matter, for investing. So I appreciate that. Deborah, I would love to hear your take on 2031 as we look back.
So 2031, we will have hopefully restructured our habits, largely as a result of COVID. I see enormous opportunities, and I think Bertrand mentioned, never give up the use of a good crisis. So the whole COVID crisis, and the fact that we now operate, the fact that I can be on this panel with all of you, and that I now work 100% of my time from home, sometimes work longer hours, and I think work harder, but I don't have to commute. I don't have to get in my car. So I think 2031, we will have restructured our habits. There'll be fewer people in the streets. We'll have electrified our public transit. We will have opportunities to rethink streets and open space, as Eduardo talked about, for community uses, which we've been doing during this crisis. And I do really have great hope about the next generation of designers and engineers. I love, Cristina, the idea that you have that carbon calculator in your phone for every decision you make. That would be great, because I think repeatability, to make it simple, you know, my staff, we work on very tight budgets and very tight schedules. So anything you can do that simplifies their lives and just wraps in the issue of carbon neutrality and very easily into what they're doing. So I know previously I talked a bit about a certain pessimism about a shift away from sustainability, but you're right, you can't build and not be essentially optimistic.
I appreciate that. I have to throw in one moderator's prerogative here, and I just realized we've been speaking for 81 minutes, and this is the first time that COVID has been mentioned. And that actually makes me extremely hopeful about thinking long-term. We've actually had a conversation focused very much on the future, not just on today. And I really, actually, I quite appreciate that. I mean, I think for every one of us here, that's probably been the first half of every conversation we've had about anything for the last 18 months. So thank you, Deborah. You reminded us of how we haven't spent all this time talking about that. Eduardo, so it's the year 2031, and we're having the same discussion.
Wow, such a great question, a tough question as well. I see a perspective, an optimistic perspective, and also a need to integration. So we need to have this all together, environment, people, and technologies through design. And I also see, to keep it very, very quick, I see that the rise of the value to many invisible domains. So let's talk about the vulnerable communities. Let's talk about the spaces in between buildings. Let's talk about memory. Let's talk about many other issues that are still invisible, that I do believe that in 10 years will be much more visible, much more tangible, but doesn't mean built, but it's going to be recognizable, tangible.
Thank you. I appreciate that. And Bertrand, give us a few ideas.
Yes, there are basically two options for the next 10 years. Either we continue business as usual, and in 2031, life will be miserable in terms of climate, in terms of environment, pollution, but life will also be very expensive because we will continue to burn oil, which will be 5 or 10 times more expensive than solar and wind. We will have people living in houses that are still not insulated. So for the poorest people, life will be too expensive, much too expensive. The purchase power will fall. Or we go for efficiency, for the new modern clean technologies and renewable energies. And then people will have electric mobility, clean in the cities. People will live in buildings that will be much cheaper in terms of energy, water usage, and so on. People will have heat pumps, extremely efficient heating, ventilation, cooling, lighting systems. We will have new business opportunities that will allow an economic growth and at the same time a decrease in the consumption of waste. So basically, it will be potentially an absolutely fabulous opportunity. But Deborah reminded us that it's not only about technology, not only about economy, it's also about public administration. When I heard that the investment budget and the maintenance budget don't depend on the same people, this makes the perspective for 2031 impossible. So we need to bring the administration, the public authorities, the public procurements, the investors, the people making the maintenance, well, all the public authorities to think together and not in silos, not to think separately. And like this, the norms, the standards can be adapted to the modern new technologies. For example, if it is prohibited to waste energy in a house, in a building, then it will create a need for all the good insulation material to come. If there is a high price on carbon, it will oblige people to reduce the carbon emissions, which means become more energy efficient, use renewable energies, but also stop to waste the energy. So we see how important it is to have a legal framework and an administrative framework that will allow all the good practices that we have spoken in the last hour and a half to really be implemented.
Bravo. Thank you very much for that, Bertrand. And I always enjoy asking this sort of a question, but the answers here today are really quite fabulous. So thank you very much all. And so with that, I come to the end of my questions. But Jamie, I'd like to give you the last word as our host. Just please, your thoughts on what we spoke about today and what you see the future looking like further.
Yeah, so first, I'd like to sincerely thank all the panelists and the online participants for their active contributions. This has been a great discussion. I thought, how could we talk for 90 minutes? But I think we can probably talk 90 more. But it's great to see that, you know, we are all committed to making progress and driving change toward net zero. Just some of the notes that I have, I guess, Bertrand, your background shows 1,000 solutions that can make change. And I'll say that we are happy to be we're part of that. Also, you know, we've all realized that we need to utilize the innovation that exists at scale. We need to work with our governments and our cities to embed it in what they do. I think we've heard that several times today, and incentivize that for not just, you know, the governments and such, but for the people, right? So we even have examples in the state of New Jersey where they are giving tax incentives for lower carbon for people, for homeowners purchasing lower carbon concrete. So we need to embed that in everything that we do. We're living in the past, you know, that was said. We need to lead by example and push the bar higher. We need to utilize data. We need more transparency. We need disclosure. Business truly needs to see this as an opportunity, as net zero as an opportunity to move forward. And buildings represent the largest opportunity overall. You know, we talked a lot about how they are 40% of the world's CO2 emissions. So we need to realize that, embrace it, and move forward. And I think I choose not to live a life of misery. So I choose to see sustainability as fashionable, always and forever. And I hope everybody else does as well. So given the scale of the change required, the net zero future won't happen without collaboration across industries, governments, actors, international organizations. And again, I thank everyone here for being a part of this. And I'm thrilled to see the energy and the shared common goal. And you can count on the commitment from Holcim to make this happen, to build for both people and planet. So thank you, everyone.
Jamie, thank you so much. Deborah, Bertrand, Cristina, Eduardo, thank you all. Thank you to Kate, who's not here anymore because she's off lecturing. And thank you in particular to those of you who joined us for this discussion and for your questions that came in. Wishing you all a very good late morning, early afternoon, evening, wherever you may be. And once again, thank you.